It is the morning of July 25th, 2000. At an airport outside Paris, 100 holidaymakers are boarding the most beautiful aircraft ever built. It is a machine that flies faster than a rifle bullet on the edge of space, in a shape so perfect that grown engineers still call it a work of art. In the cockpit sits Captain Christian Marty, a veteran pilot who once windsurfed across the Atlantic. In 90 seconds, he will be fighting for the lives of everyone on board. Because lying on the runway ahead, invisible to the crew, is a thin strip of metal no longer than a ruler, and it is about to bring down the fastest airliner in the world. 113 people will die, and within 3 years, every Concorde on Earth will be grounded forever. This is the story of a machine two nations built to touch the future, how it became the most glamorous object in the sky, and how a single freak accident ended the supersonic age. You're watching Mind-Wired, the rise and fall of Concorde. Chapter 1, Two Nations, One Impossible Idea. To understand Concorde, you have to go back to a time when the future felt like something you could build. The 1950s, the jet age, and a simple, intoxicating idea. What if a passenger plane could fly faster than sound? It was not a crazy idea. Fighter jets already flew supersonic. The dream was to shrink the world, to cross the Atlantic in the time it takes to watch a film and land before you took off by the clock. But building it was almost impossibly hard and almost impossibly expensive. So hard that no single country could afford to fail at it alone. Britain and France had each been quietly working on the same dream. And in 1962, they did something extraordinary. They signed a treaty to build it together. And that word matters. It was not a business contract. It was a binding treaty between two governments, written so that pulling out would cost a fortune in penalties. That single clause is the reason Concorde was never cancelled, even when everyone wanted to. The British firm was the British Aircraft Corporation, the French, Sud Aviation. Between them, hundreds of companies, tens of thousands of workers, 2 languages, 2 systems of measurement, 1 machine. Even the name was a negotiation. The French president, Charles de Gaulle, chose Concorde, meaning harmony. Britain, prickly, dropped the French E and spelled it Concorde. For years, it was a diplomatic sore point until a British minister named Tony Benn quietly gave the E back. It stood, he said, for excellence, England, Europe, and intent. When a Scot complained, he added that the E was also for Ecos, Scotland. But Britain and France were not alone. This was the Cold War, and supersonic flight was a matter of national pride. 2 other giants were racing for the same prize. In America, Boeing was designing a monster, the 707. Bigger, faster, meant to carry nearly 300 people at almost 3 times the speed of sound. On paper, it would crush Concorde. But the American plane grew too heavy, too complex, and too expensive. In 1971, before a single prototype ever flew, Congress cut off its funding. The American dream of supersonic travel was dead in the workshop. The other rival was the Soviet Union. And they did something Concorde could not. They got there first. The Tupolev Tu-144 looks so much like Concorde that the West nicknamed it Concordski. It flew 2 months before Concorde, at the very end of 1968. For a moment, the Soviets had won the race. But in June 1973, in front of a huge crowd at the Paris Air Show, a Tu-144 broke apart in the sky and fell onto a village below. 6 crew and 8 people on the ground were killed. To this day, no one knows exactly why. The Soviet supersonic dream never really recovered, which left just one machine standing, the one Britain and France had built together. Chapter 2, The Machine. On the 2nd of March, 1969, in Toulouse, a slim white prototype rolled onto the runway. At the controls was the French test pilot André Turcat. For 28 minutes, Concorde flew for the first time. A month later, the British prototype took off from Filton, flown by Brian Trabshaw. The dream was airborne. By late 1970, it had done what it was built to do. Mach 2. Twice the speed of sound. And everything about how it got there was strange and brilliant. Start with the wing. Not the long, straight wing of a normal jet, but a great sweeping triangle, an ogival delta. It let Concorde slice through the air at twice the speed of sound and still float gently down to land. Then the engines. 4 Rolls-Royce Olympus turbojets with afterburners called reheat that dumped raw fuel into the exhaust for a brutal kick of thrust. Concorde is the only passenger plane ever to fly for decades with afterburners, like a fighter jet. And the nose. To fly fast, Concorde needed a long, sharp, pointed nose. But that nose blocked the pilot's view on landing, so the engineers made it move. The famous droop nose, that tilted down for takeoff and landing, then raised for flight. It cruised at 60,000 feet, so high that passengers could see the curve of the earth and the sky above them turning a deep, dark blue toward black. You were, in every way that mattered, on the edge of space. It flew so fast that friction heated its skin to over 100 degrees Celsius. The whole aircraft physically stretched, growing several inches longer in flight, then shrinking again as it cooled on the ground. But all that magic came at a price. The afterburners drank fuel. The routes were limited. And the whole program cost a staggering amount, around £1.3 billion, many times what anyone had first estimated. There was one more limit, and it would quietly shape everything. When Concorde went supersonic, it dragged a sonic boom across the ground below, a thunderclap that rattled windows for miles. So country after country banned it from flying supersonic over land. And that single fact meant Concorde could only truly stretch its legs over the ocean. Its future, it turned out, would live and die on one route, across the Atlantic. Chapter 3, the Golden Age. On the 21st of January, 1976, at exactly the same moment, 2 Concordes took off, one from London, one from Paris. After all the years and all the billions, Concorde was finally carrying paying passengers. Only 2 airlines ever flew it, British Airways and Air France, the national carriers of the 2 nations that had dreamed it up. The prize was New York, but New York did not want it. The airport authority banned Concorde, terrified of the noise. It took a fight all the way to the United States Supreme Court to force the doors open. In 1977, Concorde won, and the route that defined it began. London and Paris to New York in around 3.5 hours, less than half the time of any other airliner on Earth. And Concorde became something no aircraft had ever been, not just transport, a symbol of glamour, of money, of a future that had actually arrived. A ticket cost a fortune, well over $10,000 round trip in its later years. The cabin was small and narrow, but the passengers did not care. Kings, presidents, film stars, rock stars, and bankers who simply had to be in Manhattan by lunchtime. They drank champagne at the edge of space and watched the sky turn black while the little display at the front of the cabin ticked past Mach 2. There has never been anything else quite like it. And it was fast. On the 7th of February, 1996, a British Airways Concorde crossed the Atlantic, New York to London, in 2 hours, 52 minutes and 59 seconds. A record for a passenger aircraft that still stands today. For 24 years, this was the picture. The most beautiful machine in the sky, doing the impossible every single day, as if it were nothing. It felt permanent. It felt like the future was here to stay. But there was a flaw, hidden in the wing, in the tyres, in physics no one had fully reckoned with. And on one ordinary summer afternoon, it would all come due at once. Chapter 4, 90 seconds. July 25th, 2000, Paris. A Concorde is being readied not for a scheduled airline flight, but for a charter. 100 passengers, most of them German tourists, on their way to New York to board a luxury cruise. It is a happy flight, a holiday flight. Families, couples, retirees, all of them about to ride the fastest airliner in the world for the very first time. But minutes earlier, another aircraft had used the same runway. A Continental Airlines DC-10 bound for the United States. And as it took off, According to investigators, a thin strip of titanium metal fell from one of its engines and lay on the tarmac. Nobody saw it. Nobody swept it up. It was just there, waiting as Concorde lined up and the engines spooled to full power. Concorde begins its takeoff roll. It accelerates down the runway, faster and faster, past the point of no return, the speed pilots call V1, where you are committed to fly no matter what. And then, at high speed, the left main tyre runs over the strip of metal. The tyre bursts. Not a slow leak, an explosion. A chunk of rubber weighing about 4.5 kilograms is hurled up into the underside of the wing. Here is the part that still astonishes engineers. The rubber did not pierce the fuel tank. It did not have to. The impact sent a violent shockwave through the fuel inside, and that pressure wave ruptured the tank from within. Fuel pours out in a sheet, and somewhere in the landing gear, investigators believe an electric spark most likely set it alight. In an instant, a trail of fire is streaming from the wing, longer than the aircraft itself. In the cockpit, alarms. 2 of the 4 engines lose power, but Concorde is already past V1. It cannot stop. It has no choice but to fly on a wing that is burning. Captain Marty and his crew do everything they can. They coax it into the air, but the landing gear will not retract. The drag is too great, the thrust too little, the fire too fierce. The aircraft cannot climb and it cannot accelerate. For about 90 seconds, they fight. And then, unable to stay in the air, Concorde rolls and comes down onto a small hotel in the town of Gonesse, just outside the airport. All 100 passengers and 9 crew on board are killed. 4 more people die on the ground in the hotel. 113 lives gone in a minute and a half. It was the first fatal crash in Concorde's 24-year history, and the image of the world's safest seeming, most glamorous aircraft trailing fire into the ground went around the world in hours. Chapter 5, the verdict. The investigation fell to the BEA, France's official air accident bureau. Their job was to reconstruct those 90 seconds, second by second, and answer one question: why? In January 2002, the BEA published its final report. Its conclusion was precise, and it was devastating in its simplicity. The chain began, the report found, with the metal strip from the Continental DC-10. It burst the tyre. The tyre debris ruptured the tank. The fuel ignited, and a routine takeoff became a catastrophe from which the crew could not recover. It was, in the language of engineers, a freak accident. A 1 in millions sequence where a small piece of debris found the one vulnerability in an otherwise superb machine at the one moment it could do the most harm. The report also noted things that may have made a bad day worse. The aircraft was reportedly a little over its maximum weight, with a tailwind, and questions were later raised about a missing spacer in the landing gear. These remained debated. The core chain the BEA was clear on. The finding pointed at the Continental strip, and years later, a French court agreed. In 2010, it convicted Continental Airlines and one of its mechanics, John Taylor, of involuntary manslaughter. But that was not the end of it. In 2012, an appeals court overturned the criminal conviction. It found that Taylor could not possibly have foreseen that so small a part could cause such a disaster, and that his mistake did not amount to a crime. Continental was still held partly responsible in civil terms and made to pay a share of the compensation. But no one, in the end, was found criminally guilty of causing the crash. It really was, as the engineers had said, an accident. And here is the cruel irony at the heart of this story. The crash was not really Concorde's fault. The machine had flown flawlessly for a quarter of a century, but the world would never quite see it the same way again. Chapter 6. The comeback that couldn't. Weeks after the crash, regulators withdrew Concorde's certificate of airworthiness. For the first time in 24 years, every Concorde on Earth was grounded, not retired, just silent. But British Airways and Air France were not ready to let it die. They poured money and engineering into a fix to make sure the one weakness that killed Flight 4590 could never do it again. The fuel tanks were lined with flexible Kevlar, the material used in bulletproof vests, so a burst tyre could never rupture them again. Michelin built special burst-resistant tyres. The wiring was armoured. It cost around £17 million. And it worked. On the 7th of November, 2001, Concorde flew paying passengers again across the Atlantic to New York. The supersonic age was back. But look at that date again, November 2001. Less than 2 months earlier, the 11th of September had happened, and the world Concorde was returning to was not the world it had left. Concorde lived on one thing: the willingness of the world's richest, busiest people to pay a fortune to save a few hours crossing the Atlantic. After September 11th, that trade collapsed. Premium travelers stayed home. The famous cabin flew half empty. Chapter 7. The decision. There was a deeper problem too, one that had been growing for years. Concorde was old. The fleet was built in the 1970s, and keeping such a rare, extreme machine flying was becoming ruinously expensive. And then came the blow that no amount of money could fix. Airbus, the company that had inherited responsibility for supporting Concorde, announced it would stop. No more spare parts, no more official support. Without the manufacturer standing behind it, no airline could legally or safely keep Concorde in the air for long. The decision, in truth, had been made for them. On the 10th of April, 2003, British Airways and Air France announced it together. After 27 years, Concorde would be retired. The chief executive of British Airways, Rod Eddington, called it a commercial decision. Falling revenue, rising costs. A sad day. Air France went first. Its final commercial Concorde flight landed on the 31st of May, 2003. In June, one last Air France Concorde flew home to Toulouse, where the whole story had begun. British Airways held on until autumn, and on the 24th of October, 2003, it staged a goodbye the world would never forget. 3 Concordes came home to London Heathrow within minutes of each other. One from Edinburgh, one from a final supersonic loop over the Bay of Biscay, and the very last one carrying passengers home from New York one final time. Tens of thousands of people lined the fences to watch. Grown men and women wept. They knew they were not just watching a plane land, they were watching the future being switched off. One flight remained. On the 26th of November, 2003, the last Concorde ever built made the last Concorde flight there would ever be, from Heathrow to Filton, the field where its British half was born. Its wheels touched down, and the supersonic age was over. Chapter 8. The silence since. It has now been more than 20 years, and in all that time, not a single passenger has flown faster than sound on a scheduled airline. We went to the moon and came back. We built supersonic travel and gave it up. Why has nothing replaced it? The same reasons that always haunted Concorde. It burned far too much fuel. It could only go supersonic over the sea. And the market of people willing to pay for pure speed was always, in the end, too small. Today, the survivors sit still in museums around the world. New York and Seattle, Bristol and Manchester, Paris and Barbados. Beautiful, silent, going nowhere. Children press their hands against the glass and cannot believe it was ever real. There are new attempts. A company called Boom is building a supersonic airliner, and in 2025, its small test jet became the first civilian aircraft to break the sound barrier since Concorde. Maybe the dream is not dead, only sleeping. What stays with me about Concorde is not the crash. Crashes happen. What stays with me is the choice we made afterward. For 27 years, ordinary people could look up and see the future flying overhead, twice the speed of sound, on the edge of space, real and routine. And then, quietly, we decided it cost too much. We had the technology to fly like that. We still do. We simply chose to stop. Concorde is the only time in history that human travel got slower. A reminder that progress is not a straight line, and that some futures, once switched off, are very hard to switch back on. If the story of Concorde moved you, there is another mind-wired film you should see next. The story of 21 astronauts who left Earth and never came home. It is on screen now. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe to Mindwired. Subscribe to MindWired. If any of this messed with your head a little, well, that's exactly the point. And it only happens because people like you keep showing up. And
hit subscribe right now for it. It costs you nothing, and it's the entire reason MindWired keeps making videos like this. Subscribe.